we're going to go ahead and start the A.Richard Distinguished Innovator Lecture Series with our guests, Cal grad Sabya Das and UC grad Edris Bemanian. Pranati is kind enough to introduce our speakers to us today for the class. Take it away, Pranati.
Thank you, Vicki. So today's guests come with a wide range of experiences in entrepreneurship, marketing, business, and engineering. I'm very honored to be introducing Edris Bemanian, a retail marketing expert and the CEO of Engage3, and Cal grad Sabya Das, partner at Moneta Ventures and an early stage venture capitalist. Edris completed his degree at the University of California, Davis, right by Berkeley, in economics and environment policy analysis and planning in 2010. Since 2013, Edris worked for Engage3, helping retailers enhance their pricing performance through data science, analytics, and competitive data. Initially starting off as the director of business development and now as the CEO. He's also a retail analyst at Brick Meets Click and is dedicated to exploring the space between online and in-store retailing. He serves as an advisory council member for the cybersecurity executives program at the California State University, Chico, as well as a mentor for the Graduate School of Management at UC Davis. Along with Edris, I'm excited to welcome Sabya Das, a Berkeley alum who completed his undergrad at Berkeley in cognitive science and the Berkeley Law VC program for emerging fund managers. While he spends most of his time as a VC partner at Moneta Ventures based in Sacramento, California, investing in early stage technology and healthcare companies, Sabya also advises multiple startups, including Iris Precision Medicine, Roof alumni, as a board member. Welcome, and we're super excited to hear from you.
Welcome you all. As you can tell, I'm having some challenges with my my computer, but I think I should be sharing your timelines right now. I was joking around with Edris earlier because I had Sabya on top because he does happen to be a Cal grad. What I'm hoping we can do today, we have a lot of stuff to get through. We are going to talk a little bit about your timelines and a little bit, Edris, about your company, a little bit about Sabya, what Moneta Ventures is doing. And then we have this opportunity to do two sides of a coin conversation where students can hear a little bit of something from the perspective of the CEO and also the perspective of the VC. And if we have enough time at the end, we'll have a lightning round. And as always, we will have Q&A for the last 25 to 30 minutes of class. And we will post our code. Pranati, I'm assuming that it's published already and ready to go, but we'll post our code at the end of class. I may need your help on that because I don't think I've updated it. But with that, with that in terms of just some housekeeping, Sabya, do you want to go ahead and start and take us a little bit through this top line journey of yours?
Sure, happy to, and thank you so much for having us here. It's absolutely amazing to be in front of so many awesome students, and whoever is using iClickers today, I promise the answer is going to be A on the iClicker. Don't worry if you're not in class. But I was a Cal grad. I grew up here in Sacramento, went to Berkeley for my undergrad as a pre-med student and graduated in 2014. Where I joined where I'm at right now, Moneta Ventures, an early stage venture capital firm that invests in technology companies, primarily at the seed and Series A stages. Lucky enough to be an investor in Edris's company, Engage3, that you see at the bottom right. And we've known each other for a while. I did go into school pre-med and switched about 2 years in, which was a huge change for me and my parents, obviously, which was a pretty big deal. And we'll talk more about challenges and such afterwards, but did love my time at Cal and was very thankful to have had the experiences, made the connections that I did there. But I moved back to Sacramento since, which is where I pretty much grew up my whole life. And I'm working here, investing all around the entire West Coast. And that's where I'm at right now. And Ed, go ahead and let you give your intro.
Sabya, just a question for you. If you look at this timeline, there are a lot of board positions. Can you just tell us a little bit about how those come about?
Sure, yeah. And they all came about in the last 3 years compared to where I started in 2014. So at a VC firm, usually you will be joining the boards of these companies when you lead their investment rounds. And so for us, that's quite a lot of companies. It's 40 and 45 investments total. And so the 5 that you see listed here are investments we made in the last 3 years out of our second fund. And I made partner in 2016 or 17, I believe. So after that is when you're allowed to usually start joining boards, not only the important ones. So yeah, that's why Edris's company is not included, but usually we'll get to start joining boards at that time.
Sabya, everybody is so eager to hear you. I've just done the live transcript, but if you could even speak a little bit louder, people want to hear what you have to say. For everybody out there, that's a trick for people to listen to you more, is when you speak a little softly, they move in. Just harder to do on Zoom.
Is that a bit better? Or...
Yeah, that is fantastic.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
I'll go ahead. Thank you, Sabya. Edris, are you ready? I'm going to share the screen again, and well, yeah, here we go. You'll let me know if it's not coming through. As I said, I'm having some challenges with sharing.
No worries. By the way, if it continues, I might be able to do the screen share.
Is it not sharing?
I don't see anything yet.
Yeah, it's still blacked out.
Would you like me to give
It's
it a
like
shot?
loading.
Oh, you know what? I tell you what it is. I am at UC Berkeley. All the students will know what that means. It just means that the internet is not so great here.
How's that?
So that is fantastic. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. It's what I do all day. I just sit and I give PowerPoint presentations, so it works out well. So can everyone hear me okay, by the way? Yeah, okay, awesome. So similar background to Sabya. I'm originally born in Northridge, which is LA area, but mostly grew up in the East Bay, so Pleasanton, California. Been in Davis for the last 12 years, as I said. I hope as you hear Sabya and I talk, what we talk about actually comes across as very relatable. You know, speaking for myself, not for Sabya, very normal guy. I've been lucky to have a lot of the opportunities I've had, and I think you'll find a pattern as you hear more about our stories about how we just kind of, or at least in my case, how I just stumbled into a lot of these opportunities, right? And so, not to be cliche, but I really like the quote, "Luck is when preparation meets opportunity." I've been very lucky to have people around me who've given me opportunities. I mean, I've worked for companies like And Now You Know, which is a leading, you know, media produce company. And the reason I got that job is because I took a video editing class in high school, and, you know, they needed a video editor. So I got in that way, and then that opened up doors to go and do some marketing work. There's a company on my background that says Zero Labs. And, you know, my friend and I started that group. And the way we started that group was we reached out to a bunch of companies like MTV News, like the Department of State, and a bunch of other groups, and said, "Hey, can we do a free project for you? We'll evaluate your website. We'll, you know, do some usability studies for you." And, you know, we shot out 50 messages, and the Department of State responded. We did a project for them for free, and then we referenced that to go get other clients. So it was just, you know, a lot of luck, but a lot of, you know, willingness to fail and be embarrassed and hear no and get rejected. I worked for a company called Sodexo for 2.5 years, and Sodexo is a leading food service company, but I was lucky enough to work for their marketing division and their innovation group. So what we did there was, this is going to make me sound older than I am, but we launched the first mobile applications for, you know, managing your meal plans and managing, you know, your purchases at retail stores and across different campuses and stuff. So that was really cool. But again, that was another one that I kind of stumbled into. And then when I graduated from Davis, I, you know, met a handful of different founders just to see what might be interesting. We'll talk about this more, I'm sure, but I'd always wanted to start my own company. And that was what I was fixated on after graduation. I said, I'm not even going to apply for other jobs. I'm just going to start my own company. But then I thought, well, you know, maybe I can, you know, meet some startups that need help and might be interested in, you know, tapping into someone like me. And so I met a handful of those different founders, and I happened to meet the founder of our company, Engage 3. And like I said, I wasn't planning on taking a full-time job, but I was just so enthralled by his vision. He was whiteboarding optimization problems. He was running around in socks in his office on a Sunday. definition of mad genius scientist. And I signed up and I started working with them full time the next day. And the reason I joined was because I saw that it was a company that needed help, but also was mature enough to provide some infrastructure. And then it was a guy who had actually sold the company to SAP before. So, I kind of in that context was able to choose my boss and choose an environment that seemed really growth focused and growth oriented. And it's actually been, one of the best things that I could have asked for, is to have that opportunity.
Edris, Engage 3 is not necessarily a household name. Can you tell us a little bit about what the founder of Engage 3 told you about the story that kind of got you so engaged also?
Yeah, absolutely. As you can see on the slide here, I studied economics and environmental policy analysis and planning. And so I was always interested in that intersection. And the founder of Engage 3, Ken, who Sabya knows really well, he's a data scientist by trade. He actually went to Davis for his undergrad, and he did his PhD work at UC Santa Barbara in theoretical physics. And he went and started a company that was credited with inventing the whole, since we're talking about it, I'm just going to jump ahead. That's credited with inventing this whole category called retail revenue management. It's $1 billion industry. And so his company got acquired by SAP. And so when I got in there, again, on a Sunday, I walk up these creaky old stairs in downtown Davis, very low expectations, because I, wasn't particularly impressed by the folks I'd met prior. And, it's a Sunday, I see this guy running around in his socks, like I said. I enter, it was a bit awkward at first, but then he just starts telling me his story. And then he starts whiteboarding how inefficient the supply chain is. He started whiteboarding how much money is left on the table for consumers, for manufacturers and retailers, and how if you apply some, physics in terms of the math, some quantum physics, and you apply some econometrics, you can actually help take all this inefficiency and shift it to create a win-win-win for engage the retailers, manufacturers, and consumers. And so as he was doing that, it really spoke to the economist in me, because I've always been passionate about economics. And then the other aspect that I really liked in terms of the vision was he ultimately saw how we can help retailers and brands connect with consumers better by tapping into the things that consumers care about. So human values. So whether your human values are you just want to save money in your budget, or whether your human values are I want to achieve certain health objectives because I'm looking for products that are better for me because I'm pre-diabetic, as an example, or whether it's because you care about sustainability objectives, like what's the country of origin, is it non-GMO, things like that. And so it really spoke to me in both the vision context of, wanting to create an impact in some way, but then it also spoke to me in terms of the, opportunity on an economic basis and the math that just simply went into it. And the idea that, by leveraging analytics and big data, we can actually create a signal through the supply chain to create more efficiency and help people buy more of the products that they're interested in, and create more of a signal for the suppliers to help them understand what consumers actually want.
It's interesting. So it sounds like he was really selling to you, but were you actually there for a job application?
No, it was just a meet and greet.
So it was just a meet and greet.
It was just a meet and greet. It was more of like I went in there trying to see if there was any interest, if there were any interesting projects I could help consult with. And as he started to talk, I just realized, wow, one, this person's very interesting. Perhaps one of the most interesting people I've met. And Sabya can echo this through all of his interactions with Ken. He's a genius, quite literally. And yet I also saw, and he was very forthcoming about the fact that he needed a lot of help. He was having a hard time hiring people. He was having a hard time figuring out revenue streams. He was having a hard time, doing a couple other things, not for lack of effort, but just lack of capacity, I would say. And so as I saw those, I thought, well, those are things I'm actually either good at or interested in getting good at. And so, we just talked about it, and he gave me an offer. And he was kind of smart. He said, hey, it's 24 hours to accept the offer or reject it. But which, at the time I was a little annoyed by, but, in hindsight, I'm glad he did, because I don't, it all worked out in the end.
I think that's really interesting also for, the students to kind of hear that it was this informational interview, not an interview, it was this information gathering session. You're trying to figure out what your customer needs. And then I guess you realized he needed you, or maybe he realized he needed you. What do you think was the benefit of doing that, what exploding offer used to be called? I don't know if it still is.
I think it was, as I mentioned earlier, I had this idea in my mind because I had 20 different companies I wanted to start. And I thought, I was so confident that I thought that I could just go do those and they would all be really successful. I was like, why would I, not go after these ideas? But in hindsight, I've learned so much from, what I would call entrepreneurship here at Engage 3, where I wasn't the founder, but I got to ride the coattails of a founder who was really smart, who got to work within the infrastructure and help build the startup, that now I'm really prepared to go do that down the road. I don't know how I would have done, if I had just gone for gold. So I think in that particular context, the exploding offer worked out for me. I'm not saying it's necessarily a practice that I think is super candidate friendly, but in that case, I have, no actual regrets about how we did that.
One of the other things is, in looking at Engage3 and some of the companies that you've worked with, Edris, is that they are not household names. In fact, they're much more enterprise focused. And this semester, we've heard a lot of companies who are more enterprise focused, but can you talk about that business model a little bit?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to ask Sabya, just in case you're wondering about that same thing, something similar.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that, and I have some content probably to speak to this, I don't recall anymore, but we started out, when I joined Engage3, it was actually a B2C company. So the intent was for this company to become a household name. We had a shopping app called Shopping Scout. We had users on it. We were helping them optimize their shopping trips and save money. And so, it did start out in that way. And transitioning, we had to pivot to a B2B company. Actually, do you mind if I jump ahead? Do you want to ask Sabya that question?
No, I think you're in charge. I love this.
Okay.
And Sabya, actually, while Edris is looking for that, curious if you all at Moneta have a thought on where you find more opportunity as a VC, what types of companies?
Yeah, so we invest in early stage tech usually, right? So for us, the idea was to find opportunities that are not usually found by other VCs. So we started in Sacramento, which we're down the street from you guys, but is not the typical venture-backed startup community. And so our idea is that we're going to find these underserved markets that we can invest in. And I'm just going to let Ed go ahead and figure out the thing, because we invest in tech, so we like our CEOs to be able to manage their. I'm just joking, Ed.
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready, Sabya.
So I have a question now, just a logistical question. I don't actually see Sabya, but I'm assuming everybody else sees Sabya talking.
Yeah, I see him.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so just to finish the question was, so we're looking at underserved venture communities. So we invest in Sacramento and the greater Northern California area outside of the Bay Area, which is where we're trying to find the best deals. And actually, when Ed and all presented to us, their first pitch had them as East Silicon Valley, I believe, or East something like East Bay Area. And I was like, this is a very fun way to pitch your company. But our idea is that we're going to find these great fundable companies that are outside of SF Bay Area and invest in them. So right now we have an office in Sacramento and Austin, Texas, which are our two main geographies.
Fantastic. Well, maybe Sacramento's up and coming. God knows Austin is up. Edris, you want to talk a little bit about that pivot?
Yeah. And just one thing I'll say in response to something Sabya said. What's funny, I forgot we did that, Sabya. So for everyone's benefit, at one point we said we are part of the extended Bay Area, which sounds ridiculous when you're in Davis. But part of the reason I think we did that back then was we had some investors who were based in San Francisco who said, if I can't, they weren't our investors, they were, VC out there. They said, if I can't bike to your office, I'm not going to take your meeting, which sounds ridiculous in today's day and age, but we got that a decent amount. And so, I think that's just funny to now think about in hindsight, as we, go back and look at some of those slides. I forgot, Sabya, that we presented ourselves as an extended Bay Area company.
Yeah. I mean, it's no different now. Actually, we used to say that we would only invest within, or VCs in the Bay would only invest within their Tesla radius of where they could actually go and drive to. So same concept with the number of mileage.
The Tesla radius. I like it. Actually, that's perfect. That gives you a ton of opportunity up in Sacramento.
Yeah.
So, going back to answering your question, I thought it might be helpful if I just very quickly give an overview of Engage3 beyond what we already did, and then I'll jump into the pivot story, which answers your question about B2B and how that's different. So I already talked about our founder and his prior success with the company and the SAP acquisition. In terms of what we do today, and I'll come back to the pivot. We help retailers and brands understand how to compete more effectively. it's very, as you can imagine, right, with inflation today as one example, right, it's very complicated to manage your business as a retailer because you're always juggling, how do I build loyalty with my customers, but still, make a profit? And so the whole idea behind what we do with retailers is we help them understand what items that their customers care about most, so they can be really well, priced well and fairly on those to build loyalty, and where they can find, lower elasticity items that customers have a higher willingness to pay to go and, offset that and help them, make some level of profitability. And so what we do is we deploy a lot of data science, AI, we have a massive database of, billions of price points we're collecting, every month going down to every week. And we own that data, and we can help determine through all that data who needs what product, what offer for what product at what time. And we typically are able to go and measure what are the items that usually move the needle in a particular market. At the same time, it's a big problem for us because there is $100 billion a year spent in the US alone on what's called trade promotions. And 70% of those trade promotions fail to break even. So $70 billion a year are just unprofitable investments that have been going on year over year, because that's just how the industry and the cycle works. So when you heard me earlier talking about inefficiency in the supply chain and how this all works, like that's the target, right? How do you reallocate that and deploy those funds in a way that customers will actually give you credit for, right? That they'll actually value those discounts and promotions, because today they don't. So that's a lot of our focus. We help retailers, get more informed in terms of where they compete, who they compete with, and so on. We then help them actually set their prices in the store. And then we have a vision to actually help and determine when Vicky needs an offer for a product because she particularly values organic items to incentivize a transaction, or Sabya does or doesn't. And so that's where we're going as a company. And today we're working with 6 of the top 10 retailers in North America, but you're right, we're not a household name. No, people don't know us. And so, that's always a fun challenge when recruiting, but we've been able to get more awareness, at least locally in the Sacramento Davis market, just for being one of the larger startups out here. And that's been helpful.
I also think you're one of the fastest growing startups. But
yeah.
And and that actually is a title that has been shared by another speaker, who from Imprint Energy. How does that happen? Like, who gets to say you're fastest growing, and what does that mean for you?
It's purely metric driven. So they just look at your revenue, and they'll look at your revenue growth year over year, and that's it, right? You have to meet certain thresholds. So they base it purely upon how much revenue you grew over a 3 or 5 year period, depending on which publication is looking at it. So for us, we had, multiple years where we increased 100% year over year, and we got placement on that list. And that's because we started getting better at what we were doing. We hired more people. We, started being able to reference our existing customers when we were talking to new retailers, and that helped us win more business. And so we've just been able to grow through that means. Yeah. And speaking of which, here it is. Yeah, we've been fortunate enough to be on that list 5 times. And so we're hopeful to make it in for a 6th year. We'll see how that goes. But a little bit of, we are talking about how our headquarters are in Davis. We're about 100 people. Over the next 18 months, we're looking to double in size. So for all of you who are, hunting for jobs, please check us out. We're keen to get some great talent on board. We've been recognized as an innovator by, a number of leading analysts in the space. This year was a great year for us in terms of doubling our customer count. We'd never done that before. We doubled revenue before, but actually doubling the count of our customers was a huge milestone for us. And that all sounds great, but part of the story here is it wasn't always going this well. In fact, some of the lowest points of my life were, working through this whole startup, roller coaster that we all go through. But I mentioned earlier that we used to be a B2C company. And so when I was brought on to do business development and recruiting. And with recruiting, I was very proud of the fact that I was helping grow the team. So we went from, when I joined, probably, let's say 15, 20 people up to 65 people. We started getting more users on our mobile application. We were getting tens of thousands of monthly active users. And because of that growth, we actually were getting, good accolades from the city of Davis. They declared a day Shopping Scout Day and all that. So we were feeling like we were on cloud 9 at that point. We thought that we were conquering the world. We're doing a great job. We'd had some fundraising lined up from potential investors, and we were just, ready to go. And so as a result, we were putting a lot of time, money, and effort against our post-funding plans. And then at the very last minute, the financing fell apart. And that was, that led to some of the lowest points in my life, I'll be honest. And that's because the board gave us a directive to shut down the whole company. A small group of us came together, and we came up with a pitch to save the company and pivot from a B2C to a B2B model. coming back to your question in a very long-winded way. And thankfully the board, accepted that offer or that pitch, and they supported us. So they gave us the space to do that. But that's where the hard work began. And we had to go from 65 people down to less than 9 people. And that, those were the hardest conversations that we had to have. So imagine, telling all these people that you hired, they're your friends at this point, they're family members, they're all kinds of people that you don't want to let down. And you have to let them know, hey, that job I just brought you on for in the last week or last year, or this big vision we're all excited about, that's not going to happen. We're going to completely pivot to a different business model. And for those of the team who had to stay, we had to talk them into taking massive pay cuts. So they, went down to less than 50% of their salary, which was already lower given we were a startup relative to what they could get elsewhere. So that kicked off just a stressful, point in our lives, but it was also some of the best experience in our life. And I have zero regrets about having gone through that. I've grown, and the whole team's grown a lot for having gone through it, but, wouldn't wish that upon anyone. What else did I say? Yeah. So after that pivot, we had to, we took what we had and we said, we can do the same thing, but rather than doing it as a shopping app, let's go do it by working with the retailers instead of trying to do it ourselves. And so we're able to do that. We just went on this aggressive road trip to find new customers. We found a customer who did believe in us. And they, to this day, we sing their praises because they saved our company by paying a whole year in advance on their contract. Then beyond that, we actually went back and looked who were the investors that we talked to in the past. And we'd actually been rejected by Moneta Ventures. But I remember vividly just loving that culture and that team. And I thought if there's anyone that I would want to work with, it would be this Moneta Ventures group. And so I reached out on, a whim, wondering if, they might be interested in taking a meeting. And, thankfully they did. And, and thankfully, they made the decision to invest in us, because that was then what actually, saved the company. Because I'd say we were given a lifeline or a raft by the customer, and then we were given a path to actually grow by the investors, by specifically Sabya and Moneta Ventures. And so I have a lot to say, and I can, embarrass Sabya here by saying a lot of things, but I promised him I wouldn't get too sappy on him. So maybe I'll just pause and hand over to you, Sabya, if you want to tell a little bit about the Moneta story, unless Vicky want to okay. Cool.
Sure. Yeah, I think Ed should be talking for a lot longer because his journey is absolutely amazing. And I think someone did ask a question that I'm going to touch on before even going through the rest of the slides, which was, as the CEO right now, you replaced one of the founding CEOs. And the question was, can you describe your rise, how this came to be? And for Engage 3, it was pretty fantastic because it had nothing to do with a VC firm or an investor replacing the CEO. It was the CEO rising up to the current CEO rising up to a point that pretty much had the board and the current CEO all saying that, yeah, no, this guy needs to run the company. I'm out. Was pretty much how it was. And he continues to stay on as, like Ed said, the genius on the team, the guy that is able to run the science piece of it, run the board, etc. But for Ed to join on, just to add some more color to his background, after Davis, he joined as part of the BD team, right, Ed? I think, right, on the BD and sales side. And that's when I first met him, right, was when he was just part of that BD team, and he was still a part of the company in terms of just being an employee right out of college. And for him to be able to go from there to where he is now was nuts. But he's saying that the team had 65 down to 10 people. That is exactly when we met. And so at that time, the company was at a complete, standstill in terms of revenue growth, so on and so forth. And they came to us, and Ed was one of the people. Actually, Ed was the one giving the pitch, and he pretty much said that, hey, like, here is our metrics that we're going to hit every single month for the next 6 months. And here's who we're going to hire, what we're going to do, etc. And we said no at the time, which was, a pretty big deal now looking back. And they came back to us, I think 4 or 5 months later, and Ed had the same slide on the board. And it was like there's another column next to it that had the delta between what they said they would hit and what they actually hit. And none of the numbers were less than like 5% plus or minus what they said they would hit. And that's when Ed grew from, business development representative to COO. And I was like, all right, cool. Well, that's how you do your job. But at that point, we did say yes to invest, which was pretty awesome. But he did really turn the company around, which is awesome. So if we go to the next slide, Ed, So we did invest in them back in 2015, but our firm was founded back in 2014. And so I was part of the founding team then with Lokesh Sakaria, who's a founding partner at Moneta. And so we are an early stage VC firm, primarily B2B enterprise software investing firm based in Folsom. So I think literally like 95 minutes is what Waze usually says going to Berkeley, if not taking Amtrak. We had our first fund launched in 2014, which is a $25 million fund, and currently managing about 110 million total across the two funds here, and a couple of other investment vehicles. We invested in, I realized I wrote this, one Stanford founder. It was actually a very, very, very first investment, and it's actually doing very well. So that's okay.
We believe in it on the whole ecosystem.
We'll handle it for now. But we actually also invested in the Stanford dropout. He said leave of absence, dropout, whatever it is, and we'll talk about student entrepreneurship in a bit. But it's pretty fun. But that's where we're at as Moneta right now. As a firm, we have 7 people on the investment team and growing. Yes, thank you for someone calling out the Stanford comment, because I always love to see that. I almost spelled actually I did spell Stanford with a U, and decided that's probably not very, very good of me to do. But that's where we're at as a firm. Just reach out to me if you guys want any questions about Moneta specifically, but we can move forward.
Actually, I'm curious. A student asked this earlier. You have been doing Moneta for quite a while, and obviously Edris was like, I want to work with them. I'm wondering what you think it takes to make an exceptional venture capitalist. What skill, the student asked, what skill should we master? But I'm wondering from your perspective, what you think makes you good at what you do.
Sure. So I just had some comment come up. Yeah, no. So on these chat comments coming up, definitely it's not Elizabeth Holmes. So no, we didn't invest in Theranos. Skills wise in VC, it's actually a pretty confusing question, because people think there is a very, very high threshold required to get there in terms of just the ability to manage Excel spreadsheets or anything else to be able to be good at VC. That's not the case. I think that the threshold to be able to be good at VC is not that high. In terms of if you're at Berkeley, you can probably do it, right? And once you've hit that, it really is a matter of hustling to talk to the right people that are doing the right things to be a part of those journeys. And so I'd say networking is actually the #1 skill outside of all of it. I went in with, I was a pretty high performer in terms of my high school days, etc. But the ability to meet the right people, to be able to get in the right doors, made way more difference than any amount of training could have, skills wise. So 100%, I think that's the #1 skill.
It's interesting that you say meet the right people. I sometimes think that you never know who the right person is. What does the right person mean, and how do you make sure that you focus on that for you?
Yeah, and for me, right, like when we started, so Ed has referenced Moneta being helpful on the board, and he said my name a few times, which is actually not very true. I had a lot of interactions with Ed, but I was not the one on the board. So our founding partner, Lokesh, is actually the one that was on the board and still is as an observer, I believe, as part of the company. He was my boss at my very first internship, and the founding partner of Moneta Ventures. And so he's the one that made me an offer to join Moneta when they had $0 under management. And he said, I'm not going to pay you anything, but if you want to join, feel free. This is a great idea. And I was like, I'm in. I don't care how much you're going to pay me. Knowing who to trust is someone that's going to have your back makes way more difference than any amount of metrics or anything else could, credibility wise. And so what I'd say is, if you're able to have a trial period, which is your internship or anything else with the folks that you're going to get into bed with, is a great way to go about it, right? And so for Ed, speaking about how he got to meet Ken, et cetera, I mean, it was a huge deal for him to be able to jump in, both feet first. But for me, I was lucky to have an internship with my founder right now and jump in. So for everyone here, right, is knowing that the partner, the founder, et cetera, that you're going to be working with, the manager, has your best interests ahead of you, makes a ton of difference in terms of that being the right person. And even if it's at a big company, it's just your manager, right? If they're going to look out for you, makes a very big difference throughout, right? So, I mean, I would say just ensure that they are looking out for your best interests.
That's great. We had thought that we would go to the portion of our program where we're looking at two sides of a coin. I just want to make sure that you all are up for that, or did you want to add anything else, Ed?
I did want to add one thing about Sabya and the culture of Moneta. I think what's one of the things that really stuck out to us was, and I think this just reinforces everything Sabya said, was every time we had a critical decision to make in the company, whether it was a later round of financing or a really key hire or anything really, what we could always expect from Moneta, so Lokesh and Sabya and Wybov, their other partner, Denise, and so on, was that they wouldn't just try to sell us on what was in the best interest of the fund. They would actually say, they would tell us what is in their best interest very transparently. And then they would say, but here's what's in your best interest. Here's where it overlaps. Here's where it doesn't. And we would just have an open conversation about it. And that's so unique. That doesn't happen every day. And it just builds a relationship where no matter what's happening, you can just pick up the phone and make the call, right? Regardless of how badly maybe you screwed up on something or whatever. And so when you have that relationship that's built on trust, then you're not hiding anything, and therefore you're truly able to get to the most efficient place and the best decisions because everyone can operate with all the facts versus me feeling obligated to hide certain aspects of what transpired to not look bad in front of my investor, right? It was just we've been able to operate from a place of pure trust and having each other's backs, as Sabya said, and I think that doesn't happen every day.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when we talk about trust, it seems so amorphous, but Sabya had said something that when you all said you were going to hit certain goals, you seem to be within 5% of those every time. And so there's a way of building trust that is extremely metric focused also. So people get worried about like, well, how do I do that? Well, you say what you're going to do and ideally you do it. So we said we were going to do two sides of the coin, so let's do it. And now, Edris, I feel
moving forward, I think it was a great question that came up in terms of students getting intimidated in terms of pivoting. That was in the chat in the Q&A, and so actually I will cover it later, but just pretty much actually, let me cover it later in our chat. I think me and Ed have a discussion around this. So
fantastic, and we can bring. It'd be great to have Sabya also come and ask the question in person, virtually in person. So let's Ed, I feel like I have lost control because I'm not hitting my screen. But one thing we thought would be interesting for everybody to hear is, when do you fund? When you have value, when you have a story. Was wondering if you all could take two sides of that coin.
Want me to go first, Sabya?
Go for it.
Okay. I think that there's huge value in networking and trying to raise funds early, right? So there is value in getting out there, making yourself known, and then learning more about what the investors are looking for and so on. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't have met Moneta, and then we wouldn't have had the opportunity later to follow up and have the whole experience that we had where we they saw our wins and our losses and all that, and we were able to build some trust. So I think it's important to do that. But on the other hand, I think it's critical that you build your business so that to the point that you can, such that you're not dependent on financing to get some significant momentum. To the extent that you can demonstrate momentum, right, and show that you can actually create value, you're going to find yourself in a position where you're going to have a higher success rate when talking to investors. I think a lot of people, oh, go ahead.
No, you had that or you had a retailer, a customer who already believed in you, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I think, there's so many people, there's a lot of capital out there, but there's so many people chasing that capital, right? There's a lot of noise, right? And what's great about Moneta is that they know how to, filter down and find the right talent and the right people and all that. But at the end of the day, it's still just a lot of noise. So to the extent that you can go create some momentum, whether it's in the context of registrations, POs, anything, right? Like anything that would work. But make it true momentum, not just, vanity stats to go impress an investor. I think you'll be well suited, because it also always takes a lot longer than you might expect to raise money and to close a deal. So you should try to bootstrap, get momentum, create something compelling. But in parallel, it's not binary. You should start networking, building relationships, getting advice from investors, find investors like Sabya who are happy to give advice and feedback and are super helpful and honest and transparent with you. And will tell you when you're doing something wrong too, because that's only going to make you better, but don't put all your eggs in either basket. Is that fair, Sabya? I don't know, maybe disagree, but that's my perspective.
I think it's a great answer. Yeah, overall, I think it's a great answer. And from the investor side, I love the analogy of the two sides of the coin. Is if you're thinking about starting a company, going and finding investors right off the bat isn't always the best idea. I've written a post about this. I think I called it the Goldilocks principle or something like that, which is, it can't be too hot, too cold, has to be just right, in terms of companies have to fit the thesis of the fund just as the fund fits the thesis of the company, right? So don't go out just shooting for investors off the bat, because a lot of times you're going to put a stake in the ground saying, hey, here's where we are now, here's what we're doing now. And Edris talked about the fact that they were a B2C company that was pre-revenue, that was pitching to a B2B fund that was aiming for post-revenue investments, right? And so the discrepancy is massive. So as a founder, when you guys think about this, there are many funds that will fund you as a student entrepreneur. Go talk to those folks, or wait till you get to the stage where you're in the target area for the fund.
That's great. Should we go to our next question?
Sure.
How to find. So Sabya, you just talked about there are a lot of VCs that look for students to fund. Like, how does one find that out?
Yeah, and generally, I would say the ones that are looking for students to fund, when you think of yourself just as a student that has an idea, are going to be the VCs that are funding ideas, not pure businesses at that point, right? And this is not discouraging students from starting companies. It's pretty much saying that, hey, go find the ones that are visionary, thinking about what you're thinking about, and pitch to them. There are many of them, and we've heard about the top 0.01% of those that succeed, whether it's the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world or whoever else it is, in terms of being able to pitch the right funds. At Berkeley, there's so many angel investors around the area. There's so many folks that you're going to know that do pre-seed investments. Just Google it. That's literally going to be my answer, because there are so many of them that have done these type of investments early on that you should be able to find. But I would use the alumni network more now than I would have if I was still a student. So the alumni network now is absolutely fantastic. I forget what the software name was, but would 100% try using that to find folks that are in the investment and finance world, and reach out there to be able to find the investors. And one thing to keep in mind is it's not just VCs that are in your network that are going to be useful, but it's other founders that have raised venture money, other investors that know other investors that might be investing in that category. That would be helpful, right? So I think keeping that in mind and knowing that it's not 20% of your network that's in finance that might be useful, but really 80%, because they're entrepreneurs, they might be investors, so on and so forth, that know someone that are more than willing to introduce you just because you're a Cal grad, which I've actually done, multiple times. So I'd start there.
Sabya, is there, I'm wondering if you can tell any stories about the typical way you find a venture and the most unusual way you found somebody to invest in?
Sure. I'll start with the unusual one, which is a Cal grad that showed up in Sacramento, moved in, and he messaged me and Lokesh on LinkedIn saying, hey, are you guys actually based in Folsom? Because I didn't think there's any venture capital firms in Sacramento. Do you want to talk? That was literally the message. And it was like, okay, yep, sounds good. Let's chat. Come to our office next week. We were the first investment into this company. He was a Berkeley undergrad. He went to BU for his law school, and they just raised a $50 million round from JP Morgan a couple months ago. And it was a completely just out of the blue request. But it was purely because we were local. And it was the Berkeley connection that had him reach out, being like, there's no way this is true. These guys are probably like, making something up. So that was pretty great. But the normal way that we usually look at it is one of two. We have a massive network of investors that refer deals to us. So that's the typical way. And if not that, then the outbound side of it is us reaching out to folks that we know have raised pre-seed rounds or seed rounds from reputable VCs that we'll reach out to and just keep in touch with the CEOs, pretty much in the the general demographic of where we invest. But most of it is actually referral based for us. I mean, that's actually a pretty big tip for folks here, is that knowing folks that invest in VC firms makes a big difference as well, because they're going to introduce you to those folks.
That's a big tip. Edris, what do you look for from various companies when you're looking for somebody to fund, and how do you find them?
Yeah, I think what happens to first-time entrepreneurs is you just kind of look at it initially as money's money. I need money to go build my venture. Don't care how I get it and who it comes from, as long as I get it so I can do what I need to do. And that's the absolute wrong way to look at it. Because, Sabya said, hey, you kind of want to, if you're accepting a job with a startup, you want to date a little bit before you jump in if you can, right? It's kind of similar. You want to get a sense for, are they the right fit? Do they believe in my vision? Are they going to hang in there with me when I need them to? Or do they have a different objective, which would be fine if they do, but let's go in eyes open about that. So I think what's actually really valuable is if you do go and you create some momentum so that you have some, competition or demand for you. And if you believe in what you're doing, you should be able to do that. Then I would say that you should then create your own scorecard or rubric. They're creating a scorecard on you, right? What are your values? What are you looking for an investor, right? Whether it's in the context of, hey, can they help me with my key hires? Or can they help me with local connections? Or can they help me with my later rounds of financing? Or will they just be there to support me in terms of board governance? Whatever it is that you think that you need, create a scorecard and actually score the investors back on that as well. So that can help you get to the right group. That didn't click for me until a couple of years ago. I didn't need to do it with Moneta, but as we've gone through subsequent financings, it's been very important to us. We don't just treat money as a commodity, right? You got to look at what's coming with the money.
Can you talk about any of the categories on that scorecard?
Yeah. I mean, I think some of the ones that I mentioned, but one is, if you think about your scale of company, right, and where you're at in your current problems, there's a certain stage at which, early stage, you want someone to help you navigate. Hey, with my super constrained resources, where should I put my time and money, right? What are the bets that I should make, right? Because I only have so much ammo that I can, deploy. So that's, having some help with the strategy work, right? A sounding board, someone who doesn't get in your way and slow you down, but rather actually empowers you and moves you forward. So again, it's, do they have the experience? Are they, in the case of Moneta, they're operators, right? They're not just traditional investors. They've actually founded, started, grown, and sold companies at scale at the revenue levels beyond what we're at today. So we knew that we'd be able to reach out and ask them for help in any context. So I could call Sabya, Li Ka, anyone on the phone and say, hey, I'm having this personnel problem, right? Hey, I'm having this, board governance problem, I'm having whatever that might be. This issue with compensation, how I set equity. So coming back to your question, most recently, what we looked at from an engagement perspective was, for our next financing, right, is we need someone who can help us with recruiting. We need who has an infrastructure to help us with that. We need someone who can help us as we go and look to go further international and go into new countries. We need someone who can help us evaluate potential acquisition opportunities. And we need someone who, is aligned with our long-term vision. That was, by and large, our scorecard.
I think that's really interesting. I'm conscious of our time. I actually had one more question, but maybe it'll come up in the student questions. And I'd rather we spend some time in front of students and then we can do a lightning round. So I kind of am springing this on Rishi and Pranati that we bring some students in. But Sabya, I'm hoping that you can ask your question, Franklin, you too. And maybe I ask Roman's question while we're pulling everybody in, Because I can't even remember you saying this, Sabya. What do you mean too hot?
So maybe if Roman can chime in with what that was referring to. I don't remember either. Roman, you there?
Sabya's there right now. So, oh, good. Roman, did somebody by chance, can we promote Roman to the panelist? Fantastic. Roman, put on your camera and clarify for us, please.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Edris and Sabya. Sorry about that. It was kind of right in the moment of a question, but you mentioned earlier that when you're talking to these, VC funds, you don't want something that's too cold or too hot. You want something that's exactly right for these VC funds. Was too hot in reference like momentum or just market noise around it? I was a little bit unclear about that.
No, I'm really glad you asked that because that's much easier to answer than what I thought you were going to ask. So that's great. But pretty much saying that the Goldilocks and the Three Bears, too hot, too cold, just right. That kind of analogy. Pretty much saying that you're not too early, revenue wise, product wise, or anything else for the VC firm versus too far along. So make sure you're in the right stage. So when Ed and all pitched to us early on, they were very far along technology wise, but B2B tech wise, they were very, very, early on. And so that Venn diagram finally met when we actually invested. So just making sure that is, at the right spot for the firm you invest in was pretty much the point.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So much less exciting than I thought it could be.
Yeah.
Sava, you had a question that you posted. It would be great if you could come on and ask.
Hi, yes, I'm so sorry. I'm on the East Coast, so my appearance is not great right now. But so my question was specifically, I saw on your timeline, Sabya, that you started out pre-med bio major at Berkeley. And this is a pretty big pivot from there. And you ended up obviously succeeding, doing pretty well in this space, coming from such a different space. I know that it might serve as somewhat of an inspiration to those who feel like they want to make that switch, but are intimidated by this feeling of being behind before they even start. I'm wondering if you can share some instances where your background in bio or pre-med or just a different space altogether actually enhanced your experience and brought a unique attribute to the conversation that you're VC.
That's a dope question. So pretty much, it has been helpful in two cases, but those cases have been incredibly big for our company. And so one of those was investing in a biotech startup at Moneta, which is from Davis actually. And we got lucky of being able to be a part of the round. And the reason that happened was because I talked to the CEO and he said, hey, you know what you're talking about, clearly because you were pre-med at some point. And I was like, that's true. And it's only because I worked at a lab at Berkeley while I was MCB for a while. And I was pre-med and he appreciated that. So that has helped a lot. And so looking back, I think I would not have been even able to conceptualize where I am right now when I was back in college. It's very intimidating to think about, people talking to you on these type of classes and everything else. But because I've now had the experience of being able to talk to folks that were completely outside of my industry and everything else, I would just say that, if you keep focusing on the stuff that one, you're passionate about, two, that you actually know and like, it will eventually work out in some way to your benefit. But don't stop just because of the stuff you hear in these classes is what I would say. But yeah, no, thanks for the question.
Thank you so much. And thanks for serving as an example for succeeding with the pivot like that.
Anytime.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sava. Franklin, join us.
Hi, Idris and Sabya. Great to have you guys here. And question is for both of you, whether pivoting from B2B to B2C is a risky move. Like, say if a company does pivot, and whether this is a risky move or not, and what are the benefits and consequences of so?
Yeah, that's a great question. What was nice about our situation was we had no choice, right? It wasn't a decision. It was the only decision. And so, we didn't think about it much. And what was lucky is if I look at the group of 10, or so people who stayed with the company during that pivot, all of them are still here 6 years later with the company. So, I fortunately, and selfishly get credit a lot of times because I'll do these types of events as the face of the company, but in reality, they did the work. And so some of the things that they had to figure out was, we had to pivot from this whole architecture that was built around, consumers to one that was built around supporting the largest retailers in the world. And that is a big change, right? And because corporate users have high expectations, they have a high bar, they're paying for a service, they're paying for a service and they expect a certain level of support. And we have had, early on had many challenges in supporting these organizations with thousands of people who are using our applications. So, to come back and answer your question, I think you've got to look at the strength of the team, right? If you have a team whose DNA is B2C, great, embrace that. If you have a team whose DNA is B2B, embrace that. In our case, we did happen to have more of a B2B DNA, so we were lucky in that context. As I mentioned, our founder's first company was a B2B company, so it was kind of going back to our roots in essence. But I think I've been tracking, and I'll try to find it in case Vicky can send this out afterwards, but I've been following this blog post series that's been talking about, hey, here are the companies that you had no idea pivoted, right? And they're massive household names. And when you hear about what they first started out as, and you hear about what they're doing now, it's mind numbing actually. So I think, it's all situational. But it really does come down to the team. And one thing I'll say, just to really try to answer your question, Franklin, is the common thread between those companies in that series that I was describing was that they all came together with an initial idea, and it was the intelligence and creativity of the team that created the actual business model that became massive. It was getting smart people in a room, working together as a team, creating some chemistry, and then figuring out what came next. And we were fortunate to do that and have people like that. We also had a bit of a blueprint from our founder's first company.
Got it. Thank you.
Sabya, anything you'd add to that? You've probably seen this happen. I'm giving my experience as N of one. You've probably seen this many times.
I didn't give a much better perspective on it than I ever would. So I can't add to it, but I mean, Vicky, if you want to answer one of the next questions, I can.
Actually, Sabya, go ahead and add to it. I'd love to hear your perspective. And by the way, just in case for everybody, this is like, Sabya, you're the most lovely VC, and maybe, always wanting to shine the light on the companies. I think it's actually a wonderful example as students look for people that they want to work with and investors they want to work with. So thank you for being that example. But yes, go ahead and answer Franklin's question if you have a thought.
Really appreciate that. And actually, Franklin, you want to go ahead and just state your question one more time, because I think Edris talks a little bit much, and I can't figure out what.
Oh, okay.
I'm just joking. But just what was the initial question?
So the initial question was whether the shift from B2B, from B2C to B2B,
from consumer to business, right?
Whether it is a risky move, and should you really do it unless you're cornered in, or could you do it as a strategic move as well?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. Yeah, and so I mean, Ed answered it from a strategic standpoint, which was pretty much why we invested, and they were able to pivot over. I would say if the tech is applicable for a B2B company, think about it. Otherwise, it's very difficult to try and transition your B2C application to a business one unless you have the infrastructure in place. And the reason that it worked in my mind for Engage 3 was because the founders had started and sold a company that was doing B2B price optimization for enterprise before they started the B2C one, right? So they knew how to sell into the company and all that stuff. If they hadn't, then it would have been a completely different situation, difficult situation, right? If you don't have that, which most folks don't, right? Think about how you might go about using talents in a different way. That'd be my opinion. But when Engage 3 came to us, it was a completely different place, right? So that's what I would say.
All right, got it. Thank you.
I was trying to promote Ashna, but I don't know if they're in a funky spot or not, or maybe, oh, there they are. Ashna, you want to ask your question? Oh, it's very mysterious looking.
Hello. Yeah, my question is that for when you said that you had to cut down from like 65 to 9 employees, like how did you make that decision about what roles you want to keep or like what positions you want to keep, and like did those like fewer employees fill in for the other roles that other people were doing, or did you just like let go of those roles?
Yeah, you just great question. You just keyed in on what I really think about when I say that was the hardest experience of my life. Three of us, you know, our current CTO, Anoop Doshi, and our current SVP of data operations, her name's Helena Cisneros. The three of us had to sit down in a room and look at everyone, you know, who was on the list of the company. We had to think about, based on our plan, what we needed to do. And we had to just make really hard calls. It got very emotional. So that was the most challenging part. Actually the most challenging part was then having the conversations with everybody. So it was a little bit of both. It was fewer people doing way more jobs, right? So that happened, and that was a big phenomenon. But what actually stuck with me and, you know, gets me a little emotional is as we had those conversations with a number of the folks, they believed in the company and the team so much that even though some of them were told, hey, like, we just don't have a spot for you. We love you. You know, you're our friend. We know you can create huge value, but we just don't have any room on the payroll. A few of those folks, more than a few of those folks, said, I don't care. I will work for free. And if you can hire me back in the future, awesome. I'll start looking for jobs, but I also work for free. And we were able to hire a few of those people back, and they're with the company now. And so that's like one of our, you know, happy stories. There's a gentleman named Chris Heiner who did that for a while. There's a gentleman named Abhishek Mishra who did that for a while, right? There are a lot of stories of people doing that. And we're just really fortunate to have people who cared like that. And so we're able to pay them back. So part of it was, you know, fewer people doing more jobs, and, you know, incredibly grateful to those folks because, you know, they gave up so much in terms of family, you know, immediate compensation, so many other things to make this work. And then the other part was just, figuring out like, what are the truly key roles that we have no room to be emotional about it. We have to be really objective about what is critical path for this company to be successful. And even then we didn't know whether it would work, right? We had confidence we could do it, but we didn't know it would actually work out or if we were making the right decisions. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Ashna. It's interesting when you talk about people and scaling, and really what's important in the company is execution and how you can execute. At least that's my perspective. But the kind of like sexy part, or what people get all excited about, is the pitch. And it seems like, Edris, I don't know that you necessarily had a pitch with Moneta Ventures, and I'm just kind of curious. It was one of our two sides of the coin, but I am interested in knowing how what your favorite pitch was, how you pitched, and Sabya, kind of a similar question, what you look for in a pitch.
Yeah, we actually did have a pitch, and it was, you know, it was kind of funny because we went out to bat the first time, and we made the best pitch that we could, given all the things we had, you know, that were happening around us. But Moneta ended up passing, which was a very smart decision, by the way. Actually, it was a very smart decision because at that time we did not have it figured out. We were not on the right trajectory, so their instinct was absolutely right to turn us down. And then when we came back, you know, a second time and, you know, pitched, then we put the metrics out, as Sabya said, and then they tracked us, and then as we hit the metrics, they invested. So we did have a pitch, and it was, you know, really us talking about how we had the same vision that we always had, and that we had this massive $100 billion a year opportunity of just money being thrown out the window, and how we're going to go after it in a smart way, and what we thought was a smart way. And so, you know, that was our strategy. My favorite pitch was when we actually could tie it back to the impact of the vision. There are certain pitches that come back to just like the financials, right? How are we going to make money? When are we going to be profitable? How are we going to, you know, turn a corner on X, Y, and Z? And those are fine. They're straightforward. They're just kind of the you know, playbook that anyone would run. But when we found someone who was interested in hearing the why, like, why are these people coming together to do this, right? And so we could speak to, you know, the things that we talked about earlier, the human values, the humanistic nature of, you know, being able to identify who cares about what. And then beyond that, the complexity of the science and the math, right? When people are genuinely interested in the technology and the why, those are really fun pitches and conversations versus just, do you guys check these boxes for us? I don't know if that answers your question, Vicky, but that's.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Sabya, what about you?
Yeah, I think, it's been interesting with these folks hearing a bunch of pitches. I think with what Ed said right now, 100%, that's been the case through and throughout. But for us, right? Actually, I'm going to change this because I had my notes up on the table here, and I wanted to cover a few things before we ended up.
Okay.
Vicky, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, fantastic.
Do you want me to put up that slide?
Sorry?
Do you want me to put up the slide with some of your notes?
That'd be great, yeah.
Okay, I think I can do this. And if not, Edris, I might rely on you, but let's see if you can see my share. It should say lightning round, but I will change that page. Is it coming up by chance?
Yep, you can see it now.
Wonderful. How about this conventional wisdom? Is that where you want to go?
Yeah, let's go back to lightning round.
Oh yeah, all right.
Yeah, let's start there.
All right.
And before you ask, so pretty much I think what would, you know, matter here is pretty much around, let's say, where do you invest time or money next, right? And for me, right, as you guys think about this individually, there are probably 3 places that I would expect anyone that's pitching to me to invest, which is personally, professionally, and philanthropically, right? And if you can do one of those 3 things very well, you become a great candidate for a hire, someone to invest in, or someone to work with, right? And that's been the case already a couple times. And so one of my favorite mentors ever was someone named Dale Carlson. And he was the CEO of a company named Sleep Train, which was, if you've heard the Mattress Center, Sleep Train Choo Choo, that's the name of that company, right? And so he ran that, and he told me that you should be investing your time, one of 3 things. You should be investing either time, your skill set, or your money. One of those 3 things, because nothing's going to get done without all 3 of those things happening or coming in at the same time. And so I would say that that's where I'm going to invest my time and money next, because I'm a typical Berkeley overachiever. But one of those 2 things I would assume you do. So that's why I'll start with that. But I would think about that quote because it actually meant a lot to me over the past few years, is time, skills, or money is where you put your resources. So, yeah.
Interesting. Since we're doing a lightning round, Edris?
I shouldn't mute myself during a lightning round. I like Sabya's answer a lot. And I wish I had a good framework to answer like that. But I would say where you're passionate. So I've just always been passionate about ed tech. So to answer question 3, where do you invest time and money? I love tracking companies, whether they're the master classes of the world, which one of my friends just joined recently, where they, you know, are working to disrupt how or disintermediate, celebrity lessons or whatever their actual value proposition, the elevator pitches, down to tracking what's in our actual space, which is, so much is happening right now as a function of COVID in terms of consumer preferences on online shopping in general with all the supply chain issues. So it's been fascinating for us to track, where consumers are going, and for us to figure out how do we fit into that ecosystem? How do we help our customers navigate that? So on a personal level, you find your passions, track those, but then on a more company professional level, there's so much happening in terms of consumer preferences shifting that keeps us pretty busy.
Edris, I'm going to stay with you. I think it's typical that Sabya would go to the third question first because it's just right and in the middle, but that's funny. Let's go to the first one. What's the one technology trend you've been following since you've been talking about technology?
Yeah. For us, really, it's personalization. And, what our founder likes to say a lot, Ken, is segmentation 101 is the further you segment, the greater the opportunity. And so for us, there's so much data available out there, and they're massive data sets, that if you can take advantage and figure out what matters to who, right, and meet the customers where they want to be met, then you can unlock a ton of value and you can create a lot of loyalty. So from a technology trend, it's, you talk a lot about the data privacy, and there are a lot of these hot topic issues around. But what's interesting is that the actual technology enablement that's enabling those types of things can be really powerful if deployed in the right way. And so really following what are the things that allow us to make sure you get the right communication to the right person at the right time.
How about you, Sabya?
I think that's great that you said that, because we haven't talked about this before, but my answer to that would have been that people are used to being rewarded for doing nothing to get something. And I've been like that as a college student too. And so when you think about privacy, you're sharing your data, you're sharing other stuff, and you want to get something in return for just, I don't know, doing what you usually do. And that hasn't been done in the past. And so Engage 3 actually did that. And so Ed did not cover that, but pretty much, let's say shopping habits, right? You're going to go shop at Safeway. This is true for me, but you buy, I don't know, 15 Sriracha bottles. I have one right here because I was eating it earlier with some noodles, and you don't get anything in return. But if you shop at Safeway for 5 Sriracha bottles per month, you might get $1 back. They might offer that to everyone, but not just to you. But if you can get something in return for nothing, then that's great. I will shop at that place all day long. And so they have managed to figure out that social trend of people expecting something for nothing and stay ahead of the curve. And that's been fantastic, right? So that's a social trend. I think that's way ahead of the curve in terms of tech trends. Right? Ed, you can say something?
No, you're doing great.
Yeah. So social trend wise, right? Like that's a huge deal. So for them to think about that, it actually makes them more money in the long term. And for us, that's something I track constantly, right? Which is being able to stay ahead of that piece of it.
I am going to share for feedback our code, but while I'm sharing that, I am wondering, Sabya, if you can continue, and then Edris, you can follow up on the fourth question, which is new venture, now or wait for students?
Sure. Yeah. So now that we can, I can think back and joke about it. My favorite, I think it was favorite class or professor at Berkeley, I can say OChem. I think it was Chem 3A, because it's really fun to get your ass kicked by chemistry class with a big fat C. That's what I got back then, which was awesome. But honestly, it was probably the sociology classes that I took back then were the most beneficial for me as a professional, because being able to understand how people talk, function, etc., made a huge difference for me back then, right? So the psych, soc type stuff was way more useful for me than any of the actual tech or deep tech type classes. so that was definitely the most helpful. I hated business classes back then. It was horrible. They sounded so intimidating. I was like, I don't like talking to these people. They sound like they're way too far ahead in life, and I don't want to be able to like try and even think about what they're doing right now. But no, I mean, Ed, go ahead. What do you think about that?
Yeah, my truly favorite class was I got to take archery in Davis, which was a lot of fun for half a unit. But if I put that one aside, I got to take a creative writing class. And what was interesting is that it was led by a grad student. And the prompts were just, we're going to go outside and I'm going to point to something and you guys are going to write a story in 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And that just, that was a great exercise, right? It was just, it forced all the creativity at once. And then we had to read our stories to the rest of the class. And then we would type them up, print them out, and everyone would actually edit everybody's papers. And, it was actually a bit nerve wracking to have your work critiqued like that every week, right? In these short story and in these kind of like creative story forms. But it was probably one of not only the most fun things I did, but I also learned a lot. And I think that's helped me a lot too. I wish I had taken more of those creative writing types of classes.
That's awesome. It sounds like you really make yourself vulnerable, which is not that different from what you're doing right now as CEO. I know that Sabya, you had a real opinion on whether somebody should start a company now or wait. And I'm wondering if you can kind of finish up our hour and a half together with your thoughts on that.
Sure, happy to. I would say for everyone here, right, the 2 to 4 years that you spend at a new company after you start your first job is equivalent to your undergraduate degree. That's how I would view it. It might feel like you're one, what is it? I think Celtic studies is what I had to take for my LNS breadth requirement at Berkeley. It seems like it's not useful, but the 1 or 2 comments that were made by the professor during that time, I actually was able to bring up during a pitch at some point, right? And so what that means in my mind is just spend a few years working with a startup if you want to start a company, or working with the company in the domain that you want to work at before you start your own, because it will have significant impact in terms of you knowing either what the operations within the company mean or just something about that business before you start your own. It sounds very sexy to start your own company in college, but honestly, it's like hard to comprehend what the day-to-day workings are of any of those companies without having been working in one. And so I would say just pick up a bunch by being there. So yeah, pretty much that. Just try to spend some time there, even if it means you're not working at a fancy Google or a Facebook or something else. It will make a big difference when you try and start your own.
I think that's words of wisdom, very helpful. And I actually have a couple of students who've messaged me and said, can they send you a pitch? I am wondering what your thoughts are on that. Do you ever take anything just via email? Do you send a pitch? How does it start?
Nope, don't send anything. I'm just kidding. Please do. Yeah, 100%. We've invested in companies that have been founded by recent college grads. So please do. It'd be great. And I'll put my email in or if you want to send it out, Vicky, afterwards, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, sure. I always tell students, if you're a founder, you want to be found. And so the emails are usually pretty easy. I think it's the same thing with VCs. Sabya, I don't even have your email at the moment in front of me, but I think it's probably something very clever like Sabya at Moneta Ventures, but maybe that's not it.
Close. Sabya at Moneta. Well, I should not send this, huh? Sabya at Moneta.vc. Go for it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just for all you students out there, usually it's not that much rocket science, because founders want to be found and VCs also want to be found to some extent. You have helped us explore something kind of quite different tonight and from different perspectives. And I just wanted to thank you all very, very much for doing that. It's really fun to have you all in conversation, not only because you all work together, but because you all are friends and you have that trust. And I just want to thank you for spending so much time with us when there are a couple of other things you might be able to do as well. So let us know, Edris, I'd love to have that podcast or that you were talking about. I'll send it out to the students. Both Sabya and Edris, let us know what we can do to be helpful. Edris, I think you also mentioned you might have internships available. I'll send out information on that. Sabya, let us know if you have any thoughts along that vein as well.
Will do.
Yeah, thanks for
so
having
much
us.
for having
A lot
us.
of fun. Yeah.
Thank you. Wishing you all a fabulous evening. And to you students who are still on, I believe I have not, for some reason, our video didn't post from last week. So hopefully this week by Thursday, we'll be able to see Sabya and Edris on video, as well as last week, Kevin Chow and Mike Lee. Wishing you all a good Tuesday night. Thank you very much.